The moon cast silver ribbons across the Montana forest floor as Ember ran. Her lungs burned with each desperate breath, feet pounding against the soft earth, heart hammering against her ribs. The night air was crisp with autumn chill, but sweat slicked her skin beneath a threadbare coat that did nothing to hide her scent. Not anymore. Behind her, the howls grew louder. Black Ridge pack hunters. They had picked up her trail an hour ago, when her scent suppressants began to fail. Suppressants that had kept her hidden kept her safe for the past 5 months, as she wandered the territories of the Northwest, staying nowhere long enough to be remembered. I smell her, the rejected Omega. The voice carried through the trees, followed by cruel laughter. Ember pushed harder, ignoring the branches that whipped her face, the rocks that bruised her feet through worn shoes. She hadn't survived 3 mate rejections to die in these woods, torn apart by a pack looking for sport. The tree line broke suddenly, revealing a small clearing with a weathered cabin nestled against a granite outcropping. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, a single yellow light glowing in the window. Ember hesitated. Strangers meant danger, but the howls behind her left no choice. She stumbled across the clearing and pounded on the door. "Please," she gasped, "help me." The door swung open, revealing an elderly man with a weathered face and silver hair pulled back in a neat queue. His eyes, sharp and alert despite his age, took in her disheveled appearance. His nostrils flared slightly. He could smell what she was. "Blackridge hunters?" he asked, his voice a deep rumble. Ember nodded frantically, glancing over her shoulder at the tree line where shadows were beginning to move. Without another word, the old man pulled her inside and shut the door, sliding a heavy iron bolt into place. He moved with surprising agility to the fireplace, grabbing a jar of something pungent. "Coat yourself with this," he said, thrusting the jar into her hands. "It will mask your scent." The substance smelled of earth and herbs, pungent but not unpleasant. Ember quickly rubbed it on her skin, her clothes, even through her hair. The old man watched her with a curious expression, head tilted slightly as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Your scent," he said finally. "It's unusual." Ember froze, the familiar dread creeping up her spine. How many times had she heard those words, always followed by disgust, by rejection? "I know," she whispered, chin dropping to her chest. "It's wrong." The old man made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a chuckle. "I didn't say wrong, girl. I said unusual. Sit down before you fall down." He gestured to a worn armchair near the fire. The cabin was small but tidy, filled with books and strange artifacts that spoke of a long life well traveled. As Ember sank into the chair, her legs finally giving out, a heavy pounding came at the door. "Old man," a gruff voice called. "Open up! We're tracking an Omega who came this way." The elderly man moved to the door but didn't open it. "No Omega here, Morris. Just me and my evening tea." "We caught her scent heading straight to your door, George. Open up or we'll break it down." George, as the hunter had called him, sighed heavily. "You and what, army pup? I may be old, but I can still tear out the throat of an ill-mannered young alpha who doesn't respect territorial boundaries." There was a moment of silence, then muttered conversation. "We'll be back," the voice finally said. "And if we find you've been harboring her, there'll be consequences." "Add it to my tab," George replied dryly. "Now get off my land." Ember listened as the footsteps retreated, tension slowly ebbing from her shoulders. She looked at her unexpected savior with new appreciation. Despite his age, there was something formidable about him, a quiet strength that seemed to fill the small cabin. "Thank you," she said softly. George nodded once, moving to a small kitchenette where he filled 2 mugs with something that smelled of chamomile and honey. "They'll be back," he said, handing her one of the mugs. "But not tonight. The herb mix I gave you will keep your scent masked for about 12 hours. Ember wrapped her cold fingers around the warm mug. "Why help me? You don't know me." George settled into the chair opposite her, studying her face. "I know enough. I can see you're running. I can smell that you're an Omega, and I can sense that you've been hurt." He took a sip from his mug. "Besides, I've never much cared for the Black Ridge pack. Bullies, the lot of them." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Ember stared into her tea, wondering how much to reveal, how much to trust this stranger who had saved her life. "They called me the rejected Omega," she finally said, voice barely audible over the fire. "Is that why you helped me, Pity?" George's eyes, a deep amber that spoke of his wolf nature, held hers steadily. I don't do pity, girl. Never have. Now, why don't you tell me your story? Seems to me you've been carrying it alone for too long. Something in his voice, the genuine interest without judgment, broke something open inside Ember. When was the last time anyone had actually wanted to hear her story? My name is Ember, she began, and I've been rejected by 3 mates. George's eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing, just nodded for her to continue. The first was when I was 18. His name was Ryan. The memory washed over her, still painful despite the years that had passed. It was at a pack gathering in Oregon, my home territory. I felt the mate bond snap into place the moment our eyes met across the fire. She described the initial joy, the breathless excitement of finding her mate so young. Ryan had been well respected in the pack, strong and handsome with a promising future. The perfect match for a young Omega with dreams of a family of belonging. I approached him. Ember continued staring into the fire. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst from my chest. He smiled at first, took my hand. Then he leaned in to scent me, as is tradition. George's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing what was coming. His expression changed instantly. Confusion, then discomfort, then Ember swallowed hard. Disgust. He said my scent was wrong, heavy, that I smelled infertile, broken. She recounted the public rejection, how Ryan had declared in front of witnesses that he couldn't accept a mate who couldn't give him pups. How she'd gone to the pack healers afterward, desperate for answers, only to be told that while they could find nothing physically wrong with her, alpha instincts were rarely mistaken about such things. The healers said I must carry some genetic marker for barrenness that their examinations couldn't detect. Ember said, the old hurt evident in her voice. George made a sound low in his throat, something between a growl and a scoff. Healers, he muttered, most know less than they claim. Ember looked up, surprised by his reaction. Continue, he said, gesturing with his mug. The second rejection came 2 years later, she said. His name was Marcus, a trader passing through my territory. This time, she explained, she had been more cautious. She'd felt the mate bond form, but waited, watched him try to gauge whether he might be different from Ryan. Marcus had courted her for 3 days before the bond became too strong to ignore. When I finally told him about Ryan, about what he'd said was wrong with me, Marcus assured me it didn't matter. A bitter smile twisted Ember's lips. He said Ryan was an idiot, that I was his mate, and that was all that mattered. For a week, she'd been happier than she'd dared to hope. Then Marcus had taken her to meet his family, other traders passing through. In the crowded space, with all of them breathing in her scent, she'd watched their expressions change. The same confusion, the same discomfort. His mother pulled him aside, Ember said. She whispered, but not quietly enough. She said my scent was strange, too heavy, too demanding, that it didn't smell right for breeding. That night, Marcus had come to her with regret in his eyes, echoing his mother's words. He needed children to carry on his trading routes, to inherit what he'd built. He couldn't build a family with a barren Omega. The second rejection hurt worse than the first, Ember admitted, because I'd allowed myself to hope. She described visiting different healers in a different territory. They'd run the same tests, found the same lack of obvious problems, and given her the same uncertain answer: alpha instincts don't lie. George set his mug down with a thud. What nonsense, he said firmly. The arrogance of youth to believe their instincts are infallible. You don't believe them? Ember asked, surprised. I believe they sensed something they didn't understand and jumped to convenient conclusions, George replied. But continue. You said there was a third. Ember nodded, tension returning to her shoulders. Brennan, 2 years after Marcus. He was an alpha from a neighboring pack, powerful and confident. When the mate bond had formed, Ember had actually tried to run. She'd learned her lesson twice over and knew what would happen. But Brennan had pursued her, caught her, insisted they talk about the bond. He said he'd heard about me. Ember's voice dropped to a whisper. The Omega who'd been rejected twice, the one who smelled wrong. He said he wanted to see for himself. Despite knowing it wouldn't end well, the mate bond had pulled at her. Part of her had wondered if maybe, just maybe, a stronger alpha would be different. Brennan was certainly stronger than Ryan or Marcus. He wasn't different, she said flatly. He was worse. Brennan had called a pack gathering to announce his mate. Ember had begged him not to, had a horrible feeling about what was coming, but he'd insisted. And then in front of over 100 wolves from both their packs, he'd made his pronouncement. "This is Silver," he'd announced, gesturing to her. "The Omega the moon goddess supposedly chose as my mate. But there's a problem." Ember's hands trembled around her mug as she recounted his cruel words. How he'd told everyone she was defective, that her Omega scent was wrong broken, that it reeked of infertility. "He said the moon goddess made a mistake with me." Ember's voice cracked. "He said I was useless for breeding, that I'd be a failure as a mate, as a Luna, as a mother. Then he officially rejected me in front of everyone." The bond had snapped with such force that Ember had fallen to her knees, crying out in pain. The gathered wolves had whispered around her, some sympathetic, most just uncomfortable with the public spectacle. Brennan had walked away without a backward glance. "Someone whispered that I was useless," Ember said. "That 3 rejections meant the moon goddess really had made a mistake with me." That night she'd packed everything she owned and left. She couldn't stay where everyone knew her as the defective Omega, the one even the moon goddess had gotten wrong. She'd traveled to the northeastern territories, spent her last coins on industrial-strength scent suppressors, and taken the first job she could find in a small mountain town. If I couldn't be anyone's mate, if I couldn't have the family I dreamed of, then I decided to just disappear into the background. Ember's gaze returned to the fire. "Stop being an Omega, entirely become nobody." It worked too. For almost 2 years, no one looked at me twice. No one sensed what I was. No one rejected me. She gestured vaguely at herself. "Until tonight, when my suppressants started failing. I ran when I realized what was happening, but the Blackridge hunters caught my scent." George had remained silent through the last part of her story, his weathered face unreadable. Now he stood and moved to a cabinet in the corner of the room. He returned with a bottle of amber liquid and 2 small glasses. "This story calls for something stronger than tea," he said, pouring a finger of liquor into each glass. He handed one to Ember. "For the pain." Ember accepted the glass, the liquor burning a warm path down her throat. "Those alphas," George said finally, "were fools, all 3 of them." "They all said the same thing," Ember countered, "about my scent. And did any of them have the wisdom to look beyond their first impression, to seek answers rather than jump to convenient conclusions that freed them from responsibility?" George shook his head. "No, they were young, arrogant, and afraid." "Afraid," Ember repeated, confused. "Of what?" "Of something they didn't understand." George sipped his drink. "Let me tell you a story of my own young one. Many years ago, I had a mate. Her name was Eleanor." His voice softened with the memory eyes distant with an old grief. "When we first met, other alphas had passed her over, said her scent was too complex, too challenging. They called her difficult, unpredictable. But where they sensed a problem, I sensed something extraordinary." He described a woman of fierce intelligence and quiet strength, an Omega who refused to be defined by traditional expectations. "The truth is, Ember, that mate bonds are complex. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes, but sometimes her gifts require wisdom to recognize." George set his glass down. "Those alphas who rejected you lacked that wisdom. They sensed something unusual in your scent and assumed the worst because it was easier than facing the unknown." Ember stared at him, a tiny flame of hope flickering to life in her chest. "You think there's nothing wrong with me?" "I think," George said carefully, "that what those alphas perceived as wrong might actually be something rare and precious, something they weren't strong enough or wise enough to appreciate." He stood, moving to a bookshelf laden with ancient tomes. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk more. I may have some insights about your particular situation that those so-called healers lacked." For the first time in years, Ember fell asleep without the weight of shame crushing her chest. 8 months later, Ember smoothed her uniform and took a deep breath before entering the bustling kitchen of Northern Crescent Mansion. The grandest Wolfpack estate in Montana was in full preparation mode for tonight's feast. Alpha Gabriel was celebrating his 29th year, and the council had invited unmated females from across the territory, hoping one might be his mate. 4 years he'd been Alpha, 4 years without finding his Luna. The council was getting desperate. The territory needed heirs. Stability required a queen. Ember felt the familiar twist in her chest at the thought. Once she'd dreamed of being someone's mate. Once she'd believed the moon goddess had made someone for her. Someone who would look at her like she was precious. But those dreams had died 3 times over, buried under the weight of 3 separate rejections. Her fingers automatically went to the small vial of suppressants in her pocket. George had helped her find a better supplier, one whose products were guaranteed fresh. She took them religiously every morning, masking her omega scent to something resembling a low-ranking beta. That's how she survived. That's how she stayed safe from the attention, the questions, the inevitable rejection that would come if anyone knew what she really was. Ember. Lyra's voice cut through her thoughts. Ember's friend and fellow servant rushed through the kitchen, her brown eyes wide. You need to help with the table settings immediately. They're short-staffed for the feast all hands needed. Ember nodded, gathering herself. The feast, of course. Everyone would be focused on watching the unmated females parade in front of the Alpha, hoping to be chosen. Ember would be in the background, as always, serving food, refilling drinks, being invisible. She followed Lyra to the great hall where dozens of servants were arranging elaborate place settings on long tables. At the head table sat a massive chair of polished wood and silver, reserved for Alpha Gabriel. "Did you take your suppressors today?" Lyra whispered, appearing beside her with a stack of napkins. Lyra was the only person at Northern Crescent who knew Ember's secret. She'd discovered it by accident months ago when they were assigned as roommates in the servants' quarters, but had kept Ember's confidence. Ember frowned. "Of course. Why?" "Because I can smell you just faintly, but I can smell Omega." Lyra's eyes were concerned. "You need to take more if anyone at the feast notices." Ember's stomach dropped. She'd been on the same suppressors for months. They shouldn't be failing now unless... She pulled the vial from her pocket and examined the date. Her heart stuttered. Expired. The supplier had given her expired suppressors. Tonight of all nights. "Take more now," Lyra urged, "before service starts." But there was no time. The feast was beginning. Servants were needed immediately, and Ember was swept into the rush of service. She'd just have to be extra careful. Stay far from the head table where the Alpha sat. Keep her head down even more than usual. The great hall was magnificent, lit by hundreds of candles, long tables filled with nobles and warriors. At the head table sat Alpha Gabriel, looking every inch the ruler. Even from across the hall, Ember could see his powerful build, his golden hair catching the candlelight, the way every eye in the room seemed drawn to him. He looked bored, she noticed, politely interested in the females being presented to him, but ultimately detached. The council members flanking him appeared increasingly anxious as each introduction failed to spark any particular interest. Ember moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, refilling wine cups, clearing plates. She kept her distance from the head table, stayed near the back walls. Everything was fine. The suppressors were holding well enough. She just had to get through the next few hours. Then disaster struck in the form of a clumsy noble who stumbled backward directly into Ember, sending her tray crashing to the floor and knocking her hard into the stone wall. Ember gasped in pain as her shoulder hit the stone. And in that moment of shock and pain, something inside her snapped, not physically but chemically, as if the stress and impact had burned through the last of her suppressor dose all at once. Her scent flooded the hall. Not the dulled, barely there scent of a suppressed Omega. Her real scent, full and undiluted and devastatingly strong. It rolled out from her in waves, filling the space around her, spreading through the hall like wildfire. Ember froze in horror as every Alpha in the vicinity turned to stare at her. But their reactions weren't what she expected. Most of them looked confused, uncomfortable. They could smell Omega clearly, but something about the scent was putting them off, making them turn away. All except one. At the head table, Alpha Gabriel's head snapped up like he'd been struck. His amber eyes, which had been half-lidded with boredom, suddenly blazed with intensity. His entire body went rigid, every muscle tensing. And then he was moving, standing so abruptly his chair crashed backward, crossing the hall with inhuman speed. Ember tried to run. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to hide, to get away before another rejection could destroy what was left of her heart. But Gabriel was faster. He caught her wrist gently, his touch sending electricity racing up her arm, and the mate bond slammed into both of them with the force of a physical blow. "Mate," Gabriel breathed, his voice rough with wonder and possession. "You're my mate." No. This couldn't be happening. Not again. Not with the Alpha." Ember tried to pull away, panic rising in her throat. "Please, I need to go." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." "Don't run," Gabriel said, his grip gentle but unbreakable. "I'm not letting you go. I've been searching for you for years. I felt the bond pulling at me, but I could never find the source. You were hiding. You don't understand, Ember gasped out, still trying to pull free. The hall had gone silent. Everyone was staring at them. I'm broken. You don't want me. My scent is wrong. I can't. Her voice cracked. I can't give you what you need. Gabriel's eyes narrowed. He pulled her closer, not romantically, but protectively shielding her from all the watching eyes. What are you talking about? Your scent is perfect. It's not, Ember whispered. I've been rejected 3 times. 3 mates all said my scent was wrong, that it smells infertile, that I'm barren. The healers confirmed it. I'm useless as a mate. Please just let me go now. Save us both the pain of... Stop. Gabriel's voice carried alpha command, but it was gentle. I don't know who told you these lies, but your scent isn't wrong. It's the most perfect thing I've ever smelled. And you're not barren. Those alphas were fools. They felt the mate bond too, Ember said, desperately. All 3 of them. And all 3 rejected me because of what I am. Because I can't breed. Understanding dawned in Gabriel's eyes, followed by fury. You've been rejected 3 times by mates. It wasn't a question. His jaw clenched so hard she heard his teeth grind. Names, give me their names. What? No, that's not, it doesn't matter. They were right. Something about me is wrong. There is nothing wrong with you, Gabriel said fiercely, and I will prove it. But first we're getting you out of this hall, away from all these eyes, somewhere safe where we can talk properly. Before Ember could protest, Gabriel swept her into his arms and carried her from the hall. She was too shocked to struggle, too overwhelmed by the mate bond singing in her blood, and the disaster this was going to become. Behind them, the hall erupted into whispers and speculation. As they approached the door, Ember caught a glimpse of someone standing in the shadows of the gallery above. A familiar, weathered face with knowing eyes. George. He had been watching the entire scene unfold, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He had told her all those months ago when she left his cabin to take the position at Northern Crescent that fate wasn't finished with her yet, that the moon goddess had a plan that was only beginning to unfold. As Gabriel carried her toward his private chambers, Ember wondered if perhaps George had known more than he had revealed, if perhaps this moment had been inevitable all along. The elderly wolf's eyes met hers briefly as Gabriel carried her past, and she could have sworn he mouthed 3 words, trust your heart. Then they were through the doors, leaving the shocked whispers of the feast behind, moving toward a future Ember had never dared to imagine might still be possible. Gabriel carried Ember through the winding corridors of Northern Crescent Mansion, his face a mask of controlled emotion. The staff they passed averted their eyes, but not before Ember caught their startled expressions. An alpha carrying a servant through the halls was unprecedented. The rumors would spread like wildfire. The private chambers of Alpha Gabriel were nothing like Ember had imagined during her months of service at the mansion. Instead of ostentatious luxury, the rooms were elegant but comfortable. Massive bookshelves lined the walls. A fire crackled in a stone hearth. Large windows overlooked the forested mountains beyond. Gabriel set her down gently in a sitting room, not on one of the plush couches, but in a high-backed chair that offered her a sense of control and distance. He didn't crowd her, moving instead to pour water from a crystal decanter. Drink, he said, handing her the glass. It will help with the shock. Ember accepted it with trembling hands, more to have something to hold than from thirst. The mate bond pulsed between them, an invisible cord that seemed to tighten with every passing moment. She could feel his emotions through it: wonder, concern, confusion, and beneath it all, a fierce protective instinct that threatened to overwhelm her. I can feel what you're feeling, Gabriel said quietly, taking the seat across from her. Your fear, your disbelief, your certainty that I'm going to reject you. His jaw tightened. I want you to tell me everything from the beginning about these 3 alphas who dared to reject their true mate. Ember looked down at the glass in her hands. Why does it matter? The past is the past. It matters because they hurt you. They made you believe you're broken when you're not. Gabriel leaned forward, his amber eyes intense. I need to understand what happened so I can help you see the truth. So Ember told him everything, the full story of her 3 rejections, much as she had told George all those months ago. She spoke of Ryan's disgust, Marcus's broken promises, Brennan's public humiliation. She described the healers who had examined her and found nothing obviously wrong, but had agreed that perhaps her scent indicated infertility. She explained how she had come to Northern Crescent to hide, to disappear, to stop hoping for something she could never have. Gabriel listened to all of it, his expression growing darker with each word. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Those alphas were idiots," he finally said, "and I'm going to explain why. But first I'm calling for Eleanor. She's the pack healer and the wisest wolf I know. She'll examine you properly, not like whatever quacks told you that you were broken." Before Ember could protest, Gabriel had summoned a servant and sent for the pack healer. They waited in uncomfortable silence, Ember unable to meet Gabriel's intense gaze, Gabriel unwilling to push her further than he already had. A knock at the door announced Eleanor's arrival. The healer was an elderly woman with silver-streaked dark hair and piercing green eyes that missed nothing. She entered the room with quiet dignity, nodding respectfully to Gabriel before her gaze settled on Ember. "So this is the one," she said softly. Gabriel nodded. "Eleanor, this is Ember, my mate. She's been told by 3 different alphas and their healers that she's infertile, that her scent is wrong. I need you to examine her to tell her the truth." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, Alpha." She approached Ember, her manner gentle but professional. "May I sit beside you, child?" Ember nodded, still clutching her water glass like a lifeline. "I need to scent you properly," Eleanor explained, "and I'd like to touch your wrist to feel your pulse. Is that acceptable?" Again, Ember nodded, setting aside the glass with reluctance. Eleanor took her wrist in cool, dry fingers, closing her eyes as she inhaled deeply. A moment passed, then another. Eleanor's eyes snapped open, a look of astonishment crossing her face. "Moon goddess," she breathed. "I need my books. Alpha Gabriel, don't let her leave. I need to check something." Eleanor disappeared, leaving Gabriel and Ember in uncomfortable silence once more. Ember couldn't meet his eyes, couldn't bear to see the moment when he realized those other alphas had been right, that she really was defective. "She'll be back," Gabriel said quietly. "Eleanor is the best healer in the territory. She'll know what's happening." "And if she confirms what the others said," Ember asked, voice barely audible, "that I'm broken, that I can't give you heirs." Gabriel moved from his chair, kneeling before her, so she had no choice but to meet his eyes. "Then we'll face it together. But know this, Ember, I don't care if you can bear children or not. You're my mate. That's all that matters to me." "How can you say that?" Ember whispered. "You're the alpha. You need heirs." "I need my mate more." Gabriel's voice was firm, his eyes never leaving hers. "The territory has survived without heirs before. It will again if necessary, but I won't survive without you. I've felt the bond pulling at me for years, Ember, years, like a phantom limb, an ache I couldn't soothe. Now that I've found you, nothing else matters." The door opened before Ember could respond, Eleanor returning with several ancient books cradled in her arms. She set them on a table and began flipping through them rapidly, muttering to herself. "Alpha," she said finally, "I need a moment alone with Ember." Gabriel hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave his newly found mate, but nodded and stepped into the adjoining room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Eleanor sat across from Ember, her expression somber. "Child, I need to ask you some personal questions about your heat cycles." Ember felt her cheeks warm. "They've always been regular. The healers checked that first." "And intense, more so than other omegas you have known." Ember nodded reluctantly. "My first heat was so strong they had to sedate me. The pack doctor said it was unusually powerful, but not dangerously so." Eleanor nodded as if confirming something. "And these alphas who rejected you, they all mentioned your scent specifically, that it was wrong or off somehow." "Yes, heavy, wrong, like broken omega, like infertile." Ember repeated the words that had haunted her for years. Eleanor made a sound of disgust in the back of her throat. "Fools, all of them." She turned one of the ancient books toward Ember, pointing to a passage written in old script. "Do you know what a twin carrier is, child?" Ember shook her head. "It's incredibly rare. Maybe 1 in 10,000 omegas." Eleanor tapped the passage. "The moon goddess programs certain omegas to carry multiple pups, twins, sometimes triplets. But twin carriers can't conceive with just any alpha. Their bodies are selective. They require an alpha of exceptional strength and bloodline." Ember stared at her, confusion evident. "I don't understand." The scent those alphas perceived as infertile was actually their instinct recognizing that they weren't strong enough to successfully breed with you. Eleanor's eyes were kind but firm. Your scent isn't wrong, child. It's challenging. It's your body's way of testing potential mates, ensuring only the strongest alpha can father your children. That can't be right, Ember whispered, even as something inside her yearned to believe it. It's completely right, Eleanor insisted. Your scent is heavier, more demanding than typical Omega scent because it's issuing a challenge. Only the strongest alphas can answer it. Those three who rejected you were average at best. Their instincts recognized they weren't strong enough, and they interpreted it as you being barren rather than them being insufficient. But the healers knew nothing about twin carriers because they're so rare that most modern healers don't even know they exist. The knowledge is buried in ancient texts. Eleanor tapped the books. I only know because I'm old enough to have studied the old ways. A sound from the doorway made them both look up. Gabriel stood there, his face a mixture of awe and something like vindication. So she can have children, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, Eleanor confirmed, but only with an alpha of royal or equivalent bloodline, someone with the strength to father twins. She looked between them. You, Alpha Gabriel, are exactly strong enough. In fact, I'd say the moon goddess planned this very carefully. Ember felt like the world was tilting. I'm not broken, she whispered, the realization washing over her like a wave. I was never broken. You were never broken, child, Eleanor said gently. You were selective. There's a difference, but the relief that flooded through Ember was so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. Years of believing she was defective, useless, fundamentally flawed, and it had all been a misunderstanding. A profound, painful misunderstanding. I'm not broken, she whispered again, tears streaming down her face. Years of pain, of rejection, of self-hatred, and all coming out in gasping sobs. Gabriel moved to her side, immediately pulling her into his arms. You were never broken, he murmured into her hair. Never. Those alphas were too weak for you. That's all. You were waiting for me. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Gabriel tensed, reluctant to release Ember, but equally unwilling to ignore what might be pack business. Enter, he called, keeping one arm around Ember's shoulders. The door opened to reveal George, the elderly wolf, who had saved Ember in the forest months ago. He stood straight-backed and dignified despite his age, his amber eyes taking in the scene with quiet satisfaction. George, Ember gasped, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. What are you doing here? I was invited, George replied, his gaze shifting to Gabriel. Though I suspect the Alpha may not have expected my attendance to coincide with such a momentous discovery. Gabriel's brow furrowed in confusion. You know each other. George saved my life, Ember explained, 8 months ago when Blackridge hunters were after me. He took me in, helped me find a new supplier for suppressants. He's the reason I came to Northern Crescent. Understanding dawned in Gabriel's eyes. You knew, he said to George. Somehow you knew she was my mate. George's mouth quirked in a half-smile. I suspected her scent was unusual. Powerful. The kind that would call to a true alpha, not these pretenders who rejected her. He moved into the room with the easy confidence of one used to being respected. What I didn't expect was to find my old friend Eleanor involved as well. Eleanor had risen to her feet, her face a mask of shock and joy. George, is it really you after all these years? In the flesh, old friend. George's weathered face softened with genuine affection. Still dispensing wisdom to youngsters, I see. Someone has to. Eleanor laughed, the sound rich with shared history. I'd heard rumors you were living as a hermit in the mountains, but I never quite believed it. The great George Blackwood, former chief advisor to the Grand Council. Hiding away from the world, it seemed impossible. Ember gaped at George. Chief advisor. You never told me that. You never asked, George replied with a shrug. Besides, old titles mean little in the mountains. Gabriel looked between the three of them, clearly trying to piece together the connections. Perhaps we should all sit down. It seems there are many threads to unravel here. They settled in the sitting room, Eleanor and George taking the couch while Gabriel and Ember sat in the chairs opposite. The mate bond between them hummed with growing strength, but Ember still felt overwhelmed by the revelations of the past hour. I need time, she said, suddenly interrupting the conversation that had begun to flow between the others. It's a lot. I thought I knew who I was, and now everything is different. Gabriel's disappointment was palpable through their bond, but he nodded. Take all the time you need, he said. But know this, I'm not going anywhere. You're my mate. I felt the bond the moment your scent reached me, and I'm not rejecting you. Ever. I don't care if you're a twin carrier or if you can have children at all. I need a mate first, a partner, someone I can trust and love and build a life with. If children come, wonderful. If they don't, we'll figure it out. But I'm not mating with you for breeding purposes. I'm mating with you because you're mine and I'm yours. Everything else is secondary. How can you be so sure? Ember whispered. Ryan was sure at first, too. So was Marcus. Then they got to know me and realized that they weren't strong enough, Gabriel interrupted firmly. Ember, I've met thousands of wolves in my life. I've smelled thousands of omega scents. None of them felt right. None of them called to the mate bond the way yours does. Your scent doesn't smell broken to me. It smells perfect. It smells like home. And I trust my instincts more than I trust the instincts of three alphas who couldn't recognize a gift when the moon goddess literally handed it to them. Those words, that absolute certainty in his voice, started to crack the walls Ember had built around her heart. Not completely trust, couldn't be rebuilt that quickly, but enough to let a little hope in. Enough to start believing that maybe this time really would be different. I'll stay, she said finally. Not as your Luna, not yet. But I'll stay in the mansion and we can get to know each other. The relief and joy that poured through their bond from Gabriel was almost overwhelming. That's all I ask, he said, reaching for her hand. Time. A chance. George cleared his throat. If I might make a suggestion, he said, his tone deceptively casual. Perhaps Eleanor and I could serve as advisors during this transitional period. Our combined experience might prove useful in navigating the political implications of an alpha mating with a servant. Gabriel's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Are you offering to come out of retirement, Chief Advisor Blackwood? Perhaps temporarily, George replied with a small smile. For the good of the pack, of course. And for the good of these young ones. Eleanor added, her gaze warm as she looked at Ember. They'll need guidance, especially when word of a twin carrier spreads throughout the territories. Then it's settled, Gabriel said with a decisive nod. You'll both stay at Northern Crescent as honored advisors, and Ember will remain as my honored guest. The compromise allowed Ember to save face, to have time to adjust without the pressure of immediately assuming the role of Luna. She felt a surge of gratitude toward Gabriel for understanding her need for space without taking it as rejection. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Ember had experienced with her previous mate bonds. Gabriel courted her properly, giving her space to breathe, to heal, to learn to trust again. He didn't pressure her to accept the mate bond immediately or move into his chambers or take on Luna duties. Instead, he simply spent time with her. Their first real conversation happened 3 days after the feast in the mansion gardens. Gabriel had invited her to walk with him, and Ember had accepted nervously, still half expecting him to suddenly change his mind about wanting her. Tell me about yourself, Gabriel pawed as they walked among autumn flowers. Not about the rejections, not about what others said you were. Tell me who you actually are. The question caught Ember off guard. No one had ever asked that before. Ryan had been interested in her ability to breed. Marcus in how she'd fit into his trading family. Brennan in the status she'd bring him. None of them had cared about who she was as a person. I don't know anymore, Ember admitted quietly. I used to know. Before the rejections, I was hopeful. I liked to read, to garden, to help at the pack school with the pups. I thought I'd be a mother someday, that I'd have my own family. But after she trailed off, swallowing hard, after 3 alphas told me I was broken, I stopped thinking about who I was. I just tried to be invisible. You're not invisible to men, Gabriel said firmly. You're the most visible thing in any room. Your scent calls to me like nothing ever has. And I want to know you, Ember. Not the broken omega those idiots saw. The real you. So Ember talked hesitantly at first, then more freely, as Gabriel listened without judgment. She told him about her love of reading, how she'd devoured every book in the mansion library during her time as a servant. About her talent for gardening, how she'd secretly tended a small plot behind the kitchens. About her longing to work with children, a dream that had died when she'd accepted she'd never have her own. Gabriel listened to all of it, asking questions, genuinely interested. And then he shared about himself. Not the alpha everyone saw, but the man beneath the title. How he'd lost his parents young and had to grow into leadership before he was ready. How he'd felt the mate bond pulling at him for years, but had never been able to locate the source. How lonely it was at the top, surrounded by people who wanted things from him but never really saw him. They talked until the sun set, and when they finally parted, Ember realized something startling. She liked him not just as her mate, but as a person. He was intelligent, thoughtful, surprisingly funny. Being with him felt easy in a way being with the others never had. The walks became a daily routine. Every evening, Gabriel would find Ember and they'd walk together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his day, the challenges of ruling, the politics and complications. She told him about the book she was reading, the plants she was growing, the slowly returning hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as broken as she'd believed. Gabriel introduced her to his closest friends and advisors, not as my mate, but as Ember, someone important to me. Winter, the fierce beta female who captained his guard, had been skeptical at first. 3 rejections, Winter had said bluntly during their first meeting. That's a lot of alphas saying the same thing. Why should we believe you're different? I don't know that I am, Ember had answered honestly. I thought I was broken. Eleanor says I'm a twin carrier, that those alphas were not strong enough. But I don't know, I've spent 6 years believing I was worthless. That doesn't disappear in a few weeks. Winter had studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. At least you're honest. I can respect that. And for what it's worth, your scent doesn't smell broken to me. It smells challenging, like an Omega who knows her worth and won't settle for less. Those alphas probably sensed that and ran scared. The approval from Winter, who was notoriously hard to impress, had meant more to Ember than she'd expected. Mason, the massive Gamma, who served as Gabriel's second-in-command, had been more welcoming from the start. The Alpha hasn't smiled this much in years, he told Ember during a chance meeting in the mansion quarters. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. He deserves happiness. I'm not trying to do anything, Ember had protested. Exactly, Mason had said with a knowing smile. You're just being yourself. That's what he needs. Despite the support of Gabriel's inner circle, despite the daily walks and deepening conversations, Ember still struggled to fully trust. The trauma of 3 rejections ran deep. Every time Gabriel looked at her with affection, part of Ember waited for the moment when his expression would change, when he'd smell her scent more carefully and realize what the others had, when he'd reject her too. The turning point came when Ryan showed up at the mansion. Ember was in the library when a guard came to fetch her. There's someone here to see you, says he's an old friend, Ryan of the Moon Ridge Pack. Ember's blood ran cold. Ryan, her first rejection. What could he possibly want? She found him in one of the receiving rooms looking uncomfortable and nervous. When she entered, he stood quickly, his eyes widening as he took her in. Ember wasn't dressed as a servant anymore. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her platinum blonde hair clean and styled, looking every inch what she was, the Alpha's mate, even if the bond wasn't yet fully completed. Ember, Ryan said, trying for a smile that came out as a grimace. You look well. What do you want, Ryan? I heard the news that you're Alpha Gabriel's mate. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. I wanted to apologize for what I said 6 years ago. I was young and stupid and you rejected me, Ember said flatly. You told me I smelled wrong, that I was broken and infertile. You broke my heart and made me believe I was worthless. I know, and I'm sorry, but I've been thinking. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe we could. You want to try again, Ember said, understanding dawning. Now that you know I'm the Alpha's mate, now that there's status involved, suddenly I'm not broken anymore. Ryan had the grace to look ashamed. It's not just that. I've regretted it for years. The bond, it's still there, Ember. Faint but there. We could complete it. You could. The bond is there because you never officially completed the rejection, Ember interrupted. But I'm completing it now. I, Ember, reject you, Ryan of Moon Ridge Pack. I sever whatever bond existed between us. You don't get to decide I'm acceptable now that there's a crown involved. You made your choice 6 years ago. Live with it. The bond between them snapped audibly, Ryan gasping as if struck. Ember felt only relief, one tie to her painful past severed cleanly. You'll regret this, Ryan said, anger replacing his fake contrition. When the Alpha realizes what you are, he already knows what I am. Gabriel's voice came from the doorway, and Ryan went pale. The Alpha entered the room, his presence overwhelming, his amber eyes fixed on Ryan with predatory intensity. He knows I'm a twin carrier. Ember continued, drawing strength from Gabriel's presence. He knows I'm selective. He knows I'm his. And he knows that any Alpha who rejected me was too weak to deserve me. Are you going to be a problem, Ryan of Moon Ridge? Gabriel asked, his voice soft but deadly. Ryan backed away, showing his throat in submission. No, Alpha, I'll leave. I'm sorry for disturbing. You rejected my mate, Gabriel interrupted. You broke her heart. You made her believe she was worthless. If I ever see you near her again, if I ever hear that you've spoken about her, I will consider it a personal insult. Do you understand? Yes, Alpha. Get out of my mansion. Ryan fled. Gabriel turned to Ember, and the fury in his eyes softened immediately. Are you all right? I severed the bond, Ember said, surprised, to find she was smiling. He wanted to try again now that I'm valuable, and I rejected him officially. Good, Gabriel said fiercely, pulling her into his arms. He never deserved you. None of them did. Standing in Gabriel's embrace, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek, Ember finally let herself believe it. She wasn't broken. She never had been. She'd been waiting for the right Alpha, for this Alpha, for her true mate. I'm ready, she whispered. Ready for what? To complete the bond, to stop being afraid, to trust that you mean what you say. Ember pulled back to look up at him. I'm ready to be yours. Gabriel's eyes blazed. Are you sure? I'm sure. The mating ceremony was held under the full moon 2 weeks later. It was smaller than traditional royal ceremonies because Ember wanted it that way. Just close friends, the council, and the most important pack members. She wore white furs and had flowers woven into her platinum hair. When Gabriel marked her completing the bond, Ember felt something inside her click into place, like a door that had been locked for years suddenly opening. The bond flooded her system with warmth and rightness and love and something else, a stirring of power, a gift awakening. Eleanor noticed it immediately. Your gift is manifesting, she said, her eyes wide with wonder. Life multiplier. I've read about it in the text. Twin carriers often have related gifts. You'll be able to multiply things. Start small, food, herbs, energy, but eventually you'll be able to multiply life itself. That's how you'll sustain twins when you carry them. Ember was fascinated by her new ability. She started practicing with small things at first. A single healing herb becoming 2. A small meal multiplying to feed more people. Energy doubling when she was tired. It felt like magic, like a gift she'd always had but never known how to access. 2 months after the mating ceremony, Ember realized she'd missed her heat. Not just delayed, completely absent, and she felt different, fuller somehow, like something inside her was growing. Eleanor confirmed it with a knowing smile. Pregnant, she said. About 6 weeks, I'd say. Ember's hand went to her still flat stomach, wonder blooming inside her. Already, we've only been mated for twin carriers conceive quickly with the right mate, Eleanor explained. Your body recognized Gabriel immediately. She paused, then said carefully, I'll examine you more thoroughly next week, but I suspect given your nature, you may be carrying more than one. Ember's heart skipped. Twins. It's likely, we'll know for certain soon. Ember told Gabriel that night, watching his face transform from confusion to wonder to joy. I'm pregnant, she said. About 6 weeks, Eleanor thinks. She thinks it might be twins. Gabriel's eyes widened. Twins. Moon goddess twin carriers indeed. He pulled her close, his hand resting on her stomach with reverent gentleness. We're having pups, maybe 2. His voice broke with emotion. Are you happy? Ember asked, needing to hear it. Happy, I'm ecstatic. Terrified, but ecstatic. Gabriel kissed her forehead. You're giving me everything I never dared to dream of. A mate, a family, everything. At 8 weeks, Eleanor confirmed it officially. Twins, she said, her expression grave. I can sense 2 distinct heartbeats, 2 separate auras. And Ember, they're both alphas. The room went very quiet. Gabriel stared at Eleanor. Both. Are you certain? I'm certain. Twin alphas. The firstborn in this territory in 200 years. George, who had been standing quietly by the window, made a sound low in his throat. You know the history, he said. his voice heavy with memory. The last twin alphas nearly destroyed the territory fighting over the throne. Fighting over succession, Gabriel finished. I know. Everyone knows that story. Ember felt cold fear creeping through her. What does this mean? George and Eleanor exchanged a look laden with unspoken communication. Finally, Eleanor pulled out one of her ancient texts, flipping to a marked page. There's a prophecy, she said. It's old, from around the time of the last twin alphas. It says, when Silver Moon bears Golden Twins territory, either ends or begins. Twin alphas born of blessed union bring salvation or destruction. Silver Moon, Gabriel said slowly, looking at Ember's platinum hair. Golden twins. He touched his own golden hair. It's about us, about our children. The prophecy is ambiguous, George said, stepping forward. It suggests the twins will either save or destroy the territory. The last twin alphas chose destruction. They grew up competing, eventually leading the territory into civil war. But the prophecy doesn't say destruction is inevitable. It says salvation or destruction. A choice. So our sons can choose differently. Ember set her hand protectively on her stomach. They don't have to fight. No, they don't, Eleanor agreed. But raising twin alphas to work together instead of compete will be challenging. Twin alphas are born with instincts to dominate, to be alpha. Having two in the same family, both with equal claim to power, historically it's ended badly. Gabriel's jaw set with determination. Then we'll make history differently. We'll raise them to be partners, not rivals. To be each other's greatest strength, not greatest threat. I hope you can, George said quietly. Because if the prophecy comes true in the wrong way, if they choose destruction, it could mean the end of everything we know. The news of the twin alphas spread through the territory like wildfire. Reactions were mixed. Some saw it as a blessing, a sign of the moon goddess's favor. Others saw it as a curse, a repeat of the tragedy from 200 years ago. The council was divided with heated debates about what it meant for the territory's future. A few council members, led by an old alpha named Morris, even suggested terminating the pregnancy. For the safety of the territory, Morris argued in a council meeting, we can't risk another civil war. Twin alphas are too dangerous. Ember, who'd been allowed to attend, as the Luna felt rage burn through her. Before Gabriel could respond, she stood, her voice cutting across the room. Let me make something very clear, Morris. These are my children, my sons. And if any of you think I'm going to terminate a pregnancy because you're afraid of a 200-year-old prophecy, you're insane. These twins will be raised to work together to support each other. They will not fight because we will not create an environment where fighting is necessary or rewarded. The prophecy says salvation or destruction. We're choosing salvation. The council stared at her, some shocked, some impressed. Morris opened his mouth to argue, but Gabriel cut him off. My mate has spoken, and I agree with every word. This pregnancy continues. These twins will be born, and anyone who has a problem with that can leave my council. Gabriel's voice carried absolute authority. The prophecy speaks of a choice. Our sons will have that choice. We'll make sure they choose correctly. The debate ended there, but Ember could see the worry in some faces. She understood it. Twin alphas were genuinely dangerous if they competed for power. But she refused to believe her children were doomed to destroy each other. They just needed to be raised with love, with equal value placed on both of them, with understanding that strength came from unity, not domination. As the pregnancy progressed, however, it became clear this wouldn't be easy. Twin alpha pups were larger, stronger, more demanding than typical pups. At 4 months pregnant, Ember looked like she was 6 months along. At 5 months, she could barely walk without help. The twins were growing at an accelerated rate, taking enormous amounts of energy from her body. This is normal for twin alphas, Eleanor explained, her face creased with concern. But normal doesn't mean safe. Ember, your body is under immense strain. Twin alpha pregnancies have a high mortality rate for the omega. I need you to rest as much as possible. Conserve your energy. But resting didn't seem to help. Ember grew weaker as the twins grew stronger. At 6 months, she was bedridden, barely able to sit up without assistance. Gabriel stayed by her side constantly, his worry evident despite his attempts to hide it. I'm killing you, he whispered one night, his hand resting on her swollen belly. These pups, they're too much for your body. They're not killing me, Ember said, though she could hear the weakness in her own voice. I'm just struggling to keep up with them. They need so much. Is there anything we can do? Gabriel asked Eleanor, who was checking Ember's vital signs. Not with normal healing, Eleanor said grimly. The twins are taking everything she has. If this continues, she won't survive the birth. Neither will they, most likely. They'll drain her completely before they're ready to be born. That's when Ember remembered her gift, Life Multiplier. She'd been using it for small things, multiplying food, multiplying herbs. But Eleanor had said she'd eventually be able to multiply life itself. What if she could multiply her own life force, her own energy, give the twins what they needed without depleting herself? My gift, Ember said, sitting up with effort. Life Multiplier. Eleanor, you said I'd be able to multiply life. What if I multiply my own strength, my own energy? Eleanor's eyes widened. That's theoretically possible. But Ember, you've never tried something that complex. Life multiplication on yourself while pregnant with twins who are already draining you. If you lose control, if you multiply the wrong thing or in the wrong way, I'll die anyway if I don't try, Ember said. And the twins will die too. This is the only option. Gabriel looked between them, fear and hope warring on his face. If you think you can do it, try. I trust you. Ember closed her eyes, placed both hands on her swollen belly, and reached for her gift. She'd been treating it carefully, using it for small things, afraid of what might happen if she pushed too far. But now she needed to push, needed to trust that the moon goddess had given her this gift for exactly this reason. She felt her energy first, the life force flowing through her body. It was low depleted, barely enough to keep her and the twins alive. She focused on that energy, visualized it, and then multiplied. It wasn't easy. It felt like trying to copy something while the original was still moving, still changing. But Ember held the image in her mind, held the pattern of her own life force, and duplicated it. Once, twice again, and again. Each multiplication took effort, took concentration. But with each successful duplication, she felt stronger, her energy reserves growing instead of depleting. Golden light began to emanate from her hands, spreading across her belly, suffusing her entire body. The twins inside her seemed to respond, their movements becoming less desperate, more content. They were getting what they needed without draining their mother to death. When Ember finally opened her eyes, she felt better than she had in weeks. Still tired, still pregnant, with two very large alpha pups, but no longer dying. She'd figured out how to feed them without destroying herself. That's incredible, Eleanor breathed, staring at Ember with awe. You're actively multiplying your life force. I've never seen anything like it. Will she need to do this constantly? Gabriel asked. Probably several times a day until the birth, Eleanor said. But if she can maintain it, she should survive. So should the twins. Ember did maintain it multiple times a day. She'd stop whatever she was doing and spend 20 minutes multiplying her energy, feeding the twins, keeping herself and them alive. It was exhausting in a different way, requiring intense mental focus, but it worked. She gradually regained strength, color returning to her face, energy returning to her movements. By month 7, she was up and walking again. By month 8, she looked like a healthy pregnant omega instead of a dying one. The twins continued to grow, but so did Ember's ability to sustain them. The whole territory watched with bated breath. The Silver Luna was carrying twin alphas and surviving. The prophecy was coming true, and everyone wondered which path it would take, salvation or destruction. The ancient ritual chamber deep within Northern Crescent Mansion had not been used in 2 centuries. Moonlight poured through the domed skylight, illuminating stone walls carved with the history of the pack. George supervised as servants arranged ceremonial herbs and candles in the sacred pattern of the twin circle, his weathered hands adjusting each placement with precision born of knowledge few remembered existed. This room, George explained to Gabriel, who watched with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, was built specifically for the birth of twin alphas. The last time it was used was for the twins who destroyed half the territory, Gabriel finished grimly. George shook his head. A common misconception. The room didn't fail them. We failed them. The father pitted them against each other from birth, believing competition would make them stronger. Instead, it fractured their bond and led to destruction. He placed a final silver bowl at the head of the birthing platform. This time will be different. When Ember's labor began that night, the full moon riding high in the cloudless sky, George was ready. As Eleanor and the midwives prepared Ember in the ritual chamber, he walked the grounds overseeing the formation of the protective circles. 40 elite warriors, the strongest fighters in the pack, arranged themselves in two concentric rings around the mansion, a double circle of protection for the twin heirs. "It's been 70 years since I've seen this formation," George murmured to Winter, the captain of the guard, as they completed their inspection. "Is it really necessary?" she asked, her usual confidence tinged with skepticism. "More than you know," George replied. "These twins will change everything. For better or worse, depends on how we support them from their very first breath." Inside the ritual chamber, Ember fought the most challenging battle of her life. The labor was brutal, more intense than any normal birth. Gabriel stayed by her side, his face etched with concern as he held her hand through each contraction. "I can't do this," Ember gasped after hours of labor, her strength flagging despite her gift. "They're too strong." "You can," George said firmly, taking position at the head of the birthing platform, "because you won't do it alone." He nodded to Eleanor, who took her place opposite him. Together they began an ancient chant, words in a language so old even most pack historians had forgotten it existed. The sound resonated through the chamber, vibrating in the stones themselves. "What are they doing?" Ember whispered to Gabriel between contractions. "Something I've only read about in the oldest pack chronicles," Gabriel answered, watching in amazement as a soft golden light began to emanate from the ritual circle surrounding the platform. "The twin blessing. It's been lost for generations." "Not lost," Eleanor corrected without breaking rhythm. "Just waiting for the right twins." As the chant continued, George placed his hands on Ember's temples. "Your gift, Luna. Focus it now, not just on yourself, but on the boys. I'll guide you." Ember closed her eyes, reaching for her life multiplication gift. But instead of using it as she had before, duplicating her own energy, she felt George guiding her towards something more complex, more powerful. With his steady presence anchoring her, she felt the life force of her unborn sons distinct, yet harmonized, and began to multiply, not just energy, but connection. Golden light spread from her hands across her swollen belly, but unlike before, it was joined by threads of silver from George's fingertips, weaving into the golden glow, strengthening it, directing it. "You're creating a bond between them," Eleanor breathed, recognizing what was happening. A true twin bond, forged before birth. Outside, the wolves in the protective circle began to howl, the sound rising and falling in perfect harmony with the chant inside. The entire pack felt the surge of power emanating from the ritual chamber, a power not of dominance but of unity. With a final push of strength augmented by the ritual, Ember delivered the first twin. The boy emerged not crying but alert, his amber eyes already open, glowing with intelligence beyond his newborn state. "Alexander," Gabriel whispered, cutting the cord himself as the midwife cleaned and wrapped the child. Minutes later, the second twin arrived, this one with platinum hair like his mother. As soon as he was cleaned and wrapped, the midwife placed both infants in Ember's arms. The brothers immediately reached for each other, tiny fingers intertwining. "Zane," Ember said, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Alexander and Zane." George stepped back, exhaustion evident in his aged frame, but satisfaction glowing in his eyes. "The twin blessing is complete. They are bonded not as rivals, but as partners." He looked at Gabriel. "The rest will be up to how we raise them." The news spread through the territory like wildfire. Twin alpha heirs born healthy and strong, to the Luna who had once been rejected 3 times. The prophecy fulfilled, but which half remained to be seen. For the next year, George took on the role of elder guardian to the twins, a position that hadn't existed in centuries, but that Gabriel created specifically for him. Where once George had been seen as a reclusive hermit, now his wisdom was sought daily. Council members who had dismissed him as a relic now listened attentively to his guidance on raising the territory's most precious and potentially dangerous assets. The twins developed at an astonishing rate. By 3 months, they were crawling. By 6 months, standing. By 9 months, speaking in short sentences. Their physical and mental growth outpaced normal wolf children, their alpha natures driving them to excel. But what surprised everyone most was their relationship with each other. "They don't compete," Eleanor observed one afternoon watching the boys play in the mansion gardens. "Most alpha children, even siblings, constantly struggle to establish dominance. These two support each other instinctively. The twin blessing. George explained, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a master craftsman admiring his finest work. But it's more than that. Gabriel and Ember have been careful never to compare them, never to praise one at the expense of the other. They celebrate each child's unique strengths equally. Unlike the last set of twins, Eleanor said quietly. George nodded, memory darkening his eyes. Their father saw their competition as natural, even encouraged it. Only the strongest should lead, he used to say. He couldn't see that together they were stronger than either could be alone. When the twins were 2 years old, Ember gave birth to a daughter they named Luna. Unlike her brothers, Luna was an Omega, but with a rare gift of her own precognition. Even as a baby, she would sometimes stare into space, her eyes momentarily glowing silver, seeing things no one else could see. The moon goddess has blessed this family beyond measure, Eleanor said, when she confirmed Luna's gift. 3 gifted children in 1 generation. The goddess provides what we need, George replied, watching as the twins instinctively protected their baby sister. These children may save us all. George's words proved prophetic sooner than anyone expected. When the twins turned 3, a new threat emerged. Barren and Ember's third rejection had become Alpha of the Southern Pines pack after challenging and killing its previous leader. Now he was making aggressive moves toward Northern Crescent territory, claiming the twin Alphas were an abomination, a danger to all wolfkind. At the Territorial Council meeting called to address the threat, Brennan's voice dominated the chamber. The prophecy is clear, he declared, pounding his fist on the ancient oak table. Twin Alphas bring destruction. Alpha Gabriel is risking all our lives by allowing them to grow. Several younger Alphas murmured in agreement, fear evident in their expressions. Even some of Northern Crescent's council members looked troubled. Gabriel rose to defend his sons, but George's weathered hand on his arm stopped him. The elder wolf stood slowly, his aged frame belying the power of his presence. I was there, George began, his voice quiet yet carrying to every corner of the chamber. The last time twin Alphas were born to this territory. I watched them grow from innocent pups to bitter rivals. I witnessed their final confrontation, where brother killed brother and nearly destroyed us all. The chamber fell silent, even Brennan momentarily subdued by the weight of first-hand testimony. But what most of you have forgotten or never knew is that their destruction was not inevitable. George's eyes swept the assembly, piercing in their intensity. The prophecy doesn't say twin Alphas will destroy. It says salvation or destruction, a choice. What choice? Brennan scoffed, regaining his belligerence. Alpha nature demands dominance. 2 Alphas cannot coexist, especially twins, with equal claim to power. You speak of nature as though it were simple, George replied. As though wolves are mere animals without the capacity to rise above instinct. Are you so ruled by your base nature, Alpha Brennan? A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the assembly. Brennan's face darkened with anger. The last twins were taught from birth that only one could rule, that the other must submit or be destroyed, George continued. Their father believed in strength through dominance alone. He was wrong. He gestured toward Gabriel. These twins are being raised differently to understand that their strength lies in unity, not division. I've seen them together. They aren't rivals. They're partners. Pretty words from an old wolf living in the past, Brennan sneered. Your outdated theories have no place in modern pack politics. Is that so? Gabriel's voice cut through the tension. He stood, his alpha presence filling the chamber. Then perhaps we should examine which of us is truly living in the past. George's outdated theories have saved my mate's life, blessed my territory with healthy heirs, and given us insight into ancient wisdom that most territories have forgotten. He placed a hand on George's shoulder. From this day forward, George Blackwood will serve as Elder Sage of Northern Crescent, a position above council rank, with authority second only to my own and my Luna's. The announcement sent shockwaves through the assembly. Such a position hadn't existed in wolf hierarchy for centuries. You would elevate a relic to such power, Brennan sputtered. I would recognize wisdom and experience as the invaluable resources they are, Gabriel countered, something you might learn from Alpha Brennan. The council meeting ended with no resolution to the border tensions, but Northern Crescent's position had been strengthened. George's elevation sent a clear message. This pack valued history and wisdom alongside strength and power. Several previously neutral territories leaned more openly, toward alliance with Northern Crescent afterward. As the twins grew, George took an active role in their education, teaching them not just pack history, but the deeper philosophy of leadership. He created a special sanctuary for them in the east wing of the mansion, a room filled with ancient texts, maps, and artifacts that told the story of their kind. "Why do alphas fight so much?" 4-year-old Alexander asked one afternoon, as George showed them a map depicting territorial conflicts over the centuries. "Because power feels good," George answered honestly, "and because many never learn there are greater forms of strength than dominance." "Like what?" Zane asked, his platinum head tilted in curiosity. "Like wisdom," George said, tapping his temple. "Like loyalty freely given rather than taken. Like the strength that comes from having someone you trust completely at your side." He smiled as the twins exchanged glances, their bond evident in the silent communication that passed between them. "Is that why we're stronger together?" Alexander asked. "Exactly," George confirmed. "Alone, each of you is a formidable alpha. Together, you're something this territory hasn't seen in centuries, true partners in power." The twins absorbed this lesson as they did all of George's teachings, with serious consideration belying their young age. They began attending some pack meetings with Gabriel, observing governance firsthand. Alexander showed an uncanny talent for strategy and politics, while Zane excelled in reading emotions and inspiring loyalty. "They balance each other perfectly," Gabriel remarked to Ember one evening after watching the boys help resolve a dispute between two pack members. "Alexander sees the board, Zane sees the players." "They get that from George," Ember replied. "He's teaching them to see leadership as service, not privilege." The peaceful growth of Northern Crescent was shattered when the twins were 5. Brennan, increasingly isolated as other territories aligned with Northern Crescent, formed a desperate alliance with two smaller packs and launched a surprise attack on a border outpost. "This is just the beginning," his message read. "The Abomination twins must be separated or destroyed before they destroy us all. The prophecy is clear." Gabriel immediately mobilized Northern Crescent's warriors, but it was George who proposed an unexpected strategy. "Take the twins to the parley," the elder wolf suggested during the war council. Gabriel stared at him in disbelief. "Have you lost your mind? They're 5 years old. I'm not exposing my sons to danger." "Not into battle," George clarified, unperturbed by the Alpha's outburst, "but to the negotiation that must precede it. Let Brennan and his allies see these boys for themselves. Let them witness what we've witnessed, that these aren't the destroyers he claims them to be." "It's too dangerous," Ember protested, her maternal instincts flaring. "More dangerous than war," George countered. "More dangerous than allowing Brennan's fear to spread unchecked." The twins are the subject of the prophecy, the center of this conflict. Perhaps they should also be part of the solution. After heated debate, Gabriel and Ember reluctantly agreed with strict conditions. The twins would attend the parley with Brennan, but surrounded by elite guards. They would observe only, not participate. At the first sign of danger, they would be evacuated immediately. The meeting took place on neutral ground, a meadow at the confluence of 3 territories. George rode beside the twins, his aged frame straight and dignified on his mount. He had spent hours preparing the boys, explaining what would happen and why their presence mattered. "Remember," he told them as they approached the meeting place, "you're not there to prove anything. You're there to be yourselves. That will be powerful enough." Brennan's face twisted with disdain when he saw the twin boys riding into the clearing, flanked by their father and George. "So these are the abominations," he sneered, "the bringers of destruction." Before Gabriel could respond, Alexander dismounted and stepped forward, his young face serious beyond his years. "Why do you hate us?" he asked simply. "You don't even know us." The directness of the question from such a young child seemed to throw Brennan off balance. "I know what twin alphas do," he growled after a moment. "They fight, they destroy. History proves it." "We don't fight," Zane said, joining his brother. "We're stronger together." "Now perhaps," Brennan conceded, "but when you grow older, when your alpha natures fully awaken, you'll turn on each other. It's inevitable." "No, Alexander said with surprising authority. "It's a choice. The prophecy says salvation or destruction. We choose salvation." George watched the exchange with quiet pride. The lessons he'd spent years teaching were bearing fruit in these 2 remarkable children. "Pretty words from a child who doesn't understand the forces inside him," Brennan scoffed. "You can't fight nature." "We're not fighting nature," Zane responded. "We're finding a better way to fulfill it." The exchange left Brennan momentarily speechless. These were not the mindless beasts he had expected. These were intelligent, thoughtful children with an awareness far beyond their years. The parley continued with Gabriel and Brennan negotiating terms for a ceasefire. Throughout the tense discussions, the twins observed quietly their presence, a powerful reminder of what was truly at stake. As the meeting concluded and the Northern Crescent delegation prepared to leave, disaster struck. With a subtle signal from Brennan, three of his warriors broke formation, charging toward the twins with supernatural speed. Their intention was clear: kidnap one of the boys, separate the twins, and force the prophecy toward destruction. What happened next would become legend throughout the territories. Alexander and Zane, sensing the attack, didn't run or cry out. Instead, they turned to face the charging warriors, hands clasped between them. A pulse of energy, golden from Alexander's, silver from Zane, erupted from their joined hands, creating a shield that knocked the first attacker backward. At the same moment, George moved with shocking speed, for one his age, intercepting the second warrior. Most had dismissed the elderly wolf as a ceremonial figure present only for his knowledge. But in that moment, George demonstrated combat skills honed over decades. He didn't rely on brute strength, impossible at his age, but on precise, economical movements that used his attacker's momentum against him. With a series of calculated strikes to pressure points known only to those who had studied the oldest fighting arts, he neutralized the threat in seconds. The third attacker hesitated, shocked by the unexpected resistance. That hesitation cost him dearly as Gabriel's guards closed in, subduing him instantly. "You would violate parley," Gabriel roared at Brennan, fury radiating from him in almost visible waves. "Attack children under a flag of truce." Brennan's allies were backing away from him, horror evident on their faces. Among wolves, few crimes were considered more dishonorable than violating the sacred protection of parley. "They are no children," Brennan snarled, desperation making him reckless. "They are abominations that will destroy us all. Oh, the only one bringing destruction here is you," George said, his voice carrying the weight of judgment from one who had seen centuries of wolf history unfold. "You speak of nature and tradition while violating our most sacred laws." The gathered wolves murmured in agreement. Even Brennan's own warriors were exchanging troubled glances. "Let me tell you the true story of the last twin alphas," George continued, addressing not just Brennan, but all assembled. "Brothers born with gifts like these two, but taught from their first breath to see each other as competition. Their father, a wolf much like you, Brennan believed only one could rule, that sharing power was weakness." The clearing had gone silent, every ear tuned to George's words. He would praise one while belittling the other, set them tasks designed for one to fail. By the time they were grown, their natural bond had been twisted into bitter rivalry. Their final battle destroyed not just each other, but nearly our entire territory. George's gaze swept the assembly. It wasn't their nature that brought destruction. It was how they were raised. He gestured to the twins who still stood hand in hand. "Look at these boys. Truly look at them. Do you see rivals, enemies, or do you see strength in unity?" The answer was evident to all who watched. Even those who had come with Brennan seemed moved by the display. Within days, Brennan's own pack had challenged his leadership, deposing him and banishing him from all northern territories. The attempted kidnapping had failed spectacularly, and with it, Brennan's fear-mongering crusade against the twins. When they returned to Northern Crescent, George found Alexander and Zane in the mansion gardens building an elaborate structure from sticks and stones. Their small hands worked with surprising dexterity, creating something far more complex than one would expect from 5-year-olds. "What are you building?" he asked, lowering himself carefully to sit on a nearby bench. "The new council hall," Alexander explained seriously, "for when we're grown." "See, there's no throne," Zane added, pointing to the center of the structure. "Just a council table where we both sit. That way nobody fights about who's in charge." George studied their creation, noting the careful attention to detail, the balanced design that gave equal prominence to both sides while creating a unified whole. "It's perfect," he said softly. "You've understood the most important lesson of all." "That we're better together," Alexander said. "Exactly." George reached into the pocket of his coat and withdrew a small leather-bound book. "I've been working on something for you both, a gift." The twins abandoned their building project and came to sit on either side of him. George opened the book, revealing pages filled with his neat, precise handwriting. This is the book of twin wisdom, he explained. Everything I've learned in my long life about leadership, about partnership, about the unique gift and responsibility you both share. The boys leaned in, eyes wide with interest. I won't always be here to guide you. George continued, his voice gentle but matter of fact. This book will be. When you face challenges, when you disagree, when the path forward seems unclear, these pages will help you find your way back to each other. But you'll be here for a long time, Zane protested, small fingers clutching at George's weathered hand. You're teaching us everything. George smiled, touched by the boy's concern. I'll stay as long as the moon goddess permits, little one. But the greatest gift I can give you is ensuring you'll have my wisdom even when I'm gone. 1 year later, Northern Crescent celebrated the formal naming of its twin heirs, a ceremony typically held when future alphas turned 6. The entire territory gathered for the occasion along with representatives from allied packs. The event served not just to honor the twins, but to formally recognize their unique status as future co-alphas, a governance model George had helped develop over the past year, drawing from ancient texts and his own political experience. The ceremony took place in the Great Hall of Northern Crescent Mansion. Alexander and Zane stood side by side on the dais, solemn in matching ceremonial attire, their young faces composed with remarkable dignity for children their age. Gabriel addressed the assembly, first formally declaring his sons as equal heirs to Northern Crescent leadership. Then, in a break from tradition, he called George forward. The elderly wolf approached the dais slowly but steadily, carrying a wooden box inlaid with silver. A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't part of the traditional ceremony. 6 years ago, Gabriel said, his voice carrying throughout the hall, our territory faced a prophecy that could have meant our end. When Silver Moon bears golden twins, territory either ends or begins. Many feared the worst. He placed a hand on each twin's shoulder. Today we celebrate the beginning that these boys represent. He turned to George, and we honor the wolf whose wisdom guided us to this moment. Without George Blackwood, there would be no twin heirs, no new beginning. His knowledge preserved ancient rituals that saved my Luna's life and created the bond these boys share. His counsel helped us raise them not as rivals, but as partners. His experience gave us a new model of leadership that will strengthen Northern Crescent for generations to come. Gabriel took the wooden box from George and opened it, revealing 2 silver medallions on chains. These medallions once belonged to the last twin alphas before their bond was broken. George found them in the archives and restored them, symbols of what could have been and what will be with Alexander and Zane. The twins stepped forward, and Gabriel placed a medallion around each boy's neck. Then, to everyone's surprise, he removed his own alpha medallion, the symbol of Northern Crescent leadership, and placed it around George's neck. From this day forward, George Blackwood will be known as Pack Elder Keeper of our history, guardian of our honored above all, save the alpha pair. Gabriel bowed his head to the elderly wolf, a gesture of profound respect, rarely seen from an alpha to any subordinate. The assembled wolves erupted in applause and howls of approval. Many had witnessed George's wisdom and courage firsthand over the past years. Even those who had once dismissed him as a relic now recognized his invaluable contributions to the pack. George, visibly moved by the honor, placed one hand on each twin's head in blessing. May you always remember, he said, his voice thick with emotion, that true strength lies not in domination, but in unity, not in force, but in wisdom, not in taking, but in service to others. The twins looked up at him with shining eyes, absorbing his words as they had countless lessons before. In that moment, George knew with certainty that his legacy would live on long after he was gone. That evening, after the celebrations had quieted, Ember found George sitting alone in the mansion gardens, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold. 6 years had passed since she'd stumbled into his cabin in the forest, a broken Omega fleeing for her life. Now she was Luna, mother to 4 gifted children, respected and loved throughout the territory. You should be resting, she said, sitting beside him. It's been a long day. At my age, time for rest is coming soon enough, George replied with a small smile. I'd rather spend what remains in moments like this. Ember followed his gaze to where her children played across the lawn, the twins constructing something elaborate with sticks, 3-year-old Luna, watching with solemn interest baby Asher toddling after his siblings on unsteady legs. I never imagined this, she said softly. Any of it. From rejected Omega to Luna, from believing I was barren to having 4 beautiful children. The moon goddess has her plans, George replied. Sometimes they're just harder to see through the darkness. You saw it, Ember said, taking his weathered hand in hers. You saw something in me when everyone else saw only brokenness. You saved me. No, George shook his head. I merely recognized what was already there. You saved yourself, Ember, and in doing so you saved all of us. He nodded toward the twins. They'll continue what you've started. A new way of leading, a new understanding of strength. As twilight deepened into night, Gabriel joined them carrying mugs of warm cider. The family gathered on blankets spread across the grass. 4 generations of wolves, George with his ancient wisdom, Gabriel and Ember with their hard-won strength, and the children with their boundless potential. Different ages, different experiences, but united by bonds of respect and love that transcended traditional pack hierarchies. George looked at the twins, now drowsing against their father's shoulders, their medallions glinting in the moonlight. The future he had long despaired of seeing now stretched before him, bright with promise. The cycle of destruction broken. A new beginning. You know, he said to Ember, his voice contemplative, in all my years as chief advisor, all my study of pack history and lore, I never imagined I'd live to see twin alphas working together instead of against each other. This is why we pass down our knowledge, our experiences, so that each generation has the chance to learn from our mistakes to build something better. You've been a father to me, Ember said softly, and a grandfather to my children. Your wisdom is woven into their future. And that, George replied, his eyes bright with emotion, is the greatest gift an old wolf can ask for. Not to be remembered, but to be continued. To know that what you've learned doesn't die with you, but lives on in the hearts and minds of those who come after. Under the silver moon, the prophecy stood fulfilled. The territory had not ended, but begun anew. And in the center of it all sat an elderly wolf who had once been cast aside as irrelevant, now recognized as the cornerstone of their future living proof that the greatest strength often comes wrapped in the wisdom of years, waiting only for those wise enough to recognize its value.